10:36 is the time. You're watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive. Time to see what's making the headlines with the director of the John Smith Centre at the University of Glasgow, Kezia Dugdale, and the Conservative commentator Tim Montgomerie. They will be with us from now until just before midnight. But first, let's run you through the front pages that we have, starting with the Metro. It reacts to tonight's Conservative leadership debate and warnings that Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss's attacks on each other could lose the party the next election. According to The Guardian, tax and inflation, the key discussion points. The FT reports that Russian gas supplies to Europe are under threat after Moscow decided to cut the flow to the Nord Stream pipeline to Germany to just 20% of capacity. Children are still able to buy knives on the high street with ease, according to an investigation in The Mirror. The Sun says that the footballer Cristiano Ronaldo has flown into Manchester, demanding he be able to leave United. And you will forgive me for not quoting the headline directly. The Star, blunt in its assessment of a report which found that police patrols reduce violent crime by up to 70%. Just a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages while you watch us. But we are joined this evening by Kezia Dugdale and Tim Montgomerie. Lovely to see both of you. Kezia, let's start with you, shall we? Well, first and foremost, did you actually manage to watch any of the debate? Presumably you were tuned into Sky News and couldn't be bothered with it on the BBC.
The beauty of technology, Neil, of course, is you can have more than one channel on at a time these days. So, yes, of course, I watched the debate, and I think in the round it was good television. It wasn't particularly edifying for the Conservative Party, and Labour Party spinners will be sitting tonight cutting it up into nice slices of content to go on the attack in the morning. But as you've seen from your own Snap poll, I'm not sure it's been particularly decisive either. It looks like people watching the programme, certainly regular voters, have called it a score draw. That just leaves more time for these candidates to attack each other.
Tim, as we look at the front of The Guardian, I mean, clearly there are differences of approach between the two candidates who would be Prime Minister on a number of topics. But tax, inflation, sorting out the economy, sorting out the cost of living, I mean, there is clear blue water between the two candidates on most of that.
There certainly is. And I think tonight's debate was, again, ill-tempered, which surprised me, actually, because the previous debates where we've had all of the candidates involved, they didn't go down well with the public because there was quite a lot of tetchiness between the candidates. And I thought and hoped as a Conservative supporter that both of them would rein that in tonight. But the reality is, of course, is that Rishi Sunak is well behind Liz Truss in polls of Tory members. And I think he needed to sort of go for the jugular a bit to catch up. And as you say, Neil, it's on the issue of tax, the economy, the cost of living. These are the issues I'm sure a lot of your viewers would rather us discussing tonight, because they are, rather than a Tory leadership contest, because it is the cost of living that is dominating everyone's lives at the moment. And it was obvious that the Tory leadership candidates would focus on those two issues. And Liz Truss's promise of immediate tax cuts, as she says, on day one of her becoming Prime Minister, should she win, has really become the issue so far in this race.
I mean, Kezia, we will have plenty of time to discuss the policies over the next hour and a half. But I mean, the Guardian article puts it itself. This has gotten to be incredibly acrimonious. On the record, criticism singling out Rishi Sunak's wealth and wardrobe. Liz Truss has faced claims of being economically illiterate and a former Brexit Remainer, if you can work out what that is. I mean, it's only going to get worse.
Yes, and arguably that was the mild stuff. I mean, we had a quote from Rishi Sunak tonight saying that Liz Truss's economic plans would push millions into misery and cost the Conservatives the next party election. As criticism goes, it doesn't get much harsher than that. And it's also a gift to the Labour Party. So if the main issue of this election contest and in the political debate to come is cost of living, and the dividing line is around cost of living with two polar opposites opinions on what needs to happen now, it's very difficult to see how the Conservative Party is going to be able to come through this contest with any degree of unity amongst itself. It's very, very difficult, and it's not a pretty picture for the Conservative Party tonight.
Tim, I just saw you there. You were nodding along there when Kezia said that this is a gift for the Labour Party. But if the acrimony continues, I mean, what is it that the Conservative selectorate are actually looking for? Rishi Sunak seems to be selling himself as being absolutely honest with the Conservative Party membership. Liz Truss, I don't know, perhaps clothing herself in some of the boosterism that proved to be pretty effective for Boris Johnson.
Yeah, I think the problem for Rishi Sunak is that, of course, he's been Chancellor for the last few years. And while his time as Chancellor started incredibly well, there'll be many people who remain grateful for the innovative furlough scheme that helped many families and helped Britain through the pandemic. I think since then, though, he's become much less sure-footed. And as was clear in the debate, Britain is the only major economy in the world to have put up taxes during a cost of living crisis. And he, of course, was Chancellor during that period. He put up those taxes. And this really isn't where most Conservative members think the party should be. It's not where Kezia's party, the Labour Party, is either. The Labour Party have said it was the wrong thing to put up taxes. And not just to put up taxes generally. You could have put taxes on assets, for example, which would have penalised better off people more. But the tax rise that we've all been experiencing is a rise in national insurance, which really does affect, the working families, the people in the red wall who really gave Boris Johnson his majority. So it is, as you say, Neil, it's been easier for Liz Truss, who has said that when she was, in a cabinet meeting, objected to the rise in national insurance. She's had the easier position, really, to embrace that boosterism of Boris. And it looks like Rishi Sunak is the one stuck with this very unpopular national insurance rise around his neck.
Kezia, we're going to look at page 6 of the Daily Mirror. I mean, echoing the Metro front page, which says you'll lose us the next election. Page 6 of the Mirror, though, characterising the two leadership candidates. One is a hectoring bully and the other is a total incompetent. That's just the Daily Mirror's take. But I wonder, given your experience of politics, to what extent do people make their minds up about a candidate when they see him at events like tonight? As mentioned, I was working at 9 o'clock and I'm sure even my bosses wouldn't like me to multitask and have a BBC app open on my phone whilst reading the news. But, I didn't see him. But I have seen plenty of people describing Mr Sunak's performance tonight as perhaps a little de trop, perhaps a little hectoring.
So I think there's two things to say about that. First of all, the academic evidence suggests that TV debates and general elections don't make a huge material difference. The first time we had TV debates and general elections was back when Nick Clegg was around, if you remember, and there was the Nick Clegg phenomenon for a while. After that, though, the impact of TV debates and general elections declined quite considerably, and it didn't change the minds of people who were yet to make their minds up. It didn't move the dial to any great degree. I do think it's very different, though, when it comes to internal party contests like the one that we're watching just now, which albeit is extremely important because the winner of this contest will become the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. But what happens in contests like this amongst leadership candidates within a party is that they are seeking to consolidate the votes they have and to change the votes that they need to win. And that's why you saw such an attacking style from Rishi Sunak that he actually couldn't afford to deploy in a general election campaign. He couldn't go this hard because he'd be perceived as bullish and unlikable, whereas he has to behave like this tonight in order to try and get some of those votes back from Liz Truss. The second really interesting thing I thought about the debate tonight was it ended quite positively, with both candidates being quite kind and generous to each other, only for us to turn to Twitter to see the briefing wars begin. And Liz Truss's spokespeople were already out talking about the aggressive mansplaining of Rishi Sunak's style during the evening's debate, and also talking about his private school education, leading him to carry himself with that confidence. Liz Truss herself described herself as perhaps not the slickest of communicators. That had reminiscence of "I'm not Flash, just Gordon," something that Gordon Brown used to do in TV communication exercises like this. So I do think it's different when it comes to internal party contests.
Sure.
And in that sense, it does matter.
Briefly, Tim, if we can, we just want to squeeze in the front the front of the Mail. And in leadership contests like this, there's an awful lot of what I kind of tend to call political butchery going on. You know, both candidates looking for red meat to fling their supporters' way. Liz Truss, as the Daily Mail points out, curbing the unions. I mean, I suspect that will play pretty well with large sections of the Conservative membership.
I don't think it'll just play well with Conservative members. I think, I've just had to cancel various plans, to come up to London on Wednesday because of the train strike. I live in Salisbury. During the train strike, I sort of ended up an hour and a half journey became 6 hours. We poured, hundreds of millions of pounds into the rail industry during the pandemic as a nation, only for train drivers to and train workers to want even more money from the taxpayer. And so I think actually having some sort of crackdown on militant trade unionism, it won't be popular with the Labour Party, but I think it will be popular with a lot of long-suffering commuters and other people who depend upon our public services.
Tim, Kezia, we will be back to you in just a couple of minutes' time, but you stay right where you are. After the break, we will be once again discussing Northern Ireland's original First Minister, David Trimble, and indeed his legacy after this. Welcome back to the press preview. As you can see, Kezia Dugdale, Tim Montgomerie still with us. And Tim, let's turn to you first, and we return to the front page of The Guardian. Of course, a lot of the front page furniture taken up by other stories, but you would have been surprised if a major national newspaper did not mention the passing of Lord Trimble.
A huge figure in our history, and those of us who are old enough to remember the Troubles in Northern Ireland know that for a large part of modern British history, there was terrible violence, not just on the streets of Northern Ireland, but it spilled over into Britain as well. Lots of innocent people lost their lives, and it was a huge conflict. And with all conflicts, huge amounts of compromise need to be made by both sides. And it often takes some of the more hardline members of the communities to make the compromises because they have the authority. David Trimble was someone that at the time of the Good Friday Agreement really did have the confidence of the unionist community. And he's able to make the compromises with Sinn Féin, with the SDLP, that brought peace in Northern Ireland. And he was a giant figure. He was a prickly person in many ways. He was not easy to get on with. I certainly had a few arguments with him in recent years over various political issues unrelated to Northern Ireland. But without him, perhaps we wouldn't have had peace in Northern Ireland when we did. And so a real giant of our politics, and may he rest in peace. He certainly has earned a good place upstairs for all the efforts he made on behalf of the peace process.
I mean, Kezia, those of us who grew up on the west coast of Scotland were perhaps not as directly involved with events that were taking place in Northern Ireland as those who were living in Belfast. But we certainly knew what was going on just across the water. Your reflections on the death of David Trimble?
Yes, well, it definitely shaped us and shaped British politics without question. Next year will mark 25 years since the Good Friday Agreement, and I'm involved in my day job in thinking about some good ways to remember that particular achievement achieved specifically by David Trimble and by John Hume from the SDLP, who were both then awarded Nobel Peace Prizes for their efforts. And I think one thing that you'll see a lot of in the obituaries that are going to follow in the coming days is a recognition of the fact that David Trimble and indeed John Hume both essentially lost their political careers because of the sacrifices they made in securing peace. There is no better act or greater act of public service than to do the right thing and to make those compromises, to seek that consensus that they did that brought peace to Northern Ireland. So there's no doubt that he was a giant of politics, and it's down to him in a great and significant part that the peace that we enjoy, that fears so fragile now in Northern Ireland is down to his achievements.
Tim, a slight change of direction for our last story. I am not a fan of Eurovision. I will be getting absolute pelters on my social media after pointing that out for about the umpteenth time. You, I know, are presumably one of the UK's biggest fans. You must be dead excited that Eurovision is coming back to these shores.
Neil, don't tell anyone, but I'm with you. I'm afraid I'm another Eurovision skeptic. So hopefully Kez will rescue our reputation and protect us on social media by being enthusiastic for it. But look, what I am always enthusiastic about is having a big event like this in Britain. And I'm sorry that because of the conflict in Ukraine that they won't get to host it. They obviously deserve the opportunity to host it. But I'm sure, I think the BBC, if we mention the BBC again, they're getting a lot of coverage tonight on Sky.
Yeah, sure.
But the BBC will be able to host it, and I hope there'll be a good thread running through it. I'm sure there will be, where we honour the people of Ukraine, because it's a conflict that's still going on.
Indeed.
And perhaps has dropped a little bit too much from the headlines.
Kezia, you've got 5 seconds to tell us why we're both wrong and Eurovision is brilliant.
Well, because Eurovision is fundamentally about politics. I'm shocked and appalled that you both. Sam Ryder's done a great video tonight saying why he's so proud to bring it to the country, and I think that's really good and worth a watch.